it is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate. And I've been speaking with international leaders this morning to that end. So I want to reassure the British public that we're doing everything we can to stabilise the situation, to de-escalate.
Keir Starmer keeps saying the same word, de-escalation. He repeats it like a broken record, calling for restraint, diplomacy, dialogue. He warns Trump not to ramp things up, as if a carefully worded tweet could hold back bums. But here's the brutal truth. No one is listening. Not Trump, not Iran, not even Britain's own generals. While Starmer is busy drafting yet another statement, the world has already moved on. America is striking hard. Iran is reeling. Israel isn't blinking. And he's still in the corner, mumbling about peace talks that don't exist anymore. Then Lord Dannatt weighed in, and he didn't need to shout. With calm precision, he dismantled everything Starmer thought he stood for. So what did Dannatt say? That was too harsh but so true, that Starmer needs to hear it. Let's find out.
What's your analysis of the Prime Minister's rhetoric here, not just today in this statement that he issued at 7:30 this morning, but also this week? It was only on Thursday that the PM was warning Trump not to, quote, ramp up attacks. He also posted on X this notion that Donald Trump wasn't going to do this. And now, of course, he has, Lord Dannatt. I've just spoken to Michael Portillo, the former Defence Secretary, who thinks the Prime Minister's being, well, a little lacklustre in his support of the US.
This is where it all begins. The interviewer, polite but deliberate, pins Keir Starmer to the wall. She's not speculating. She's not spinning. She's laying out his contradictions in plain sight. Just days earlier, Starmer had publicly warned Trump to de-escalate.
Needed.
Well, my focus is on de-escalating the situation. I accept your challenge that there is a risk of escalation. That's a risk to the region. It's a risk beyond the region. And that's why all our focus has been on de-escalating, getting people back around to negotiate what is a very real threat in relation to the nuclear programme. In relation to the UK, we were not involved in the attack. We were given due notice, as we would expect as close allies to the US, and we have been moving assets to the region to make sure that we're in a position to protect our own interests, our personnel and our assets, and of course those of our allies.
Prime Minister, if Iran attacks the US, that would be an attack on a NATO ally. If they attack bases, etc. in the region, it could trigger Article 5. Are you prepared for that, and would the UK become involved?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about what may happen because all of my focus is on de-escalation.
He posted that Trump wasn't going to strike. And guess what happened? Trump bombed Iran into the Stone Age. That's not just a bad prediction. It's a catastrophic miscalculation from a man who wants to lead the UK through War and Peace, stood before the world and said, relax, Trump's not that crazy. Then Trump launched bunker busters. You can't spin that. It's like confidently declaring the Titanic won't sink, and then drowning in your own arrogance. In that moment, viewers across the country watched Starmer's foreign policy credibility deflate like a sad balloon. His so-called principled diplomacy collapsed before a single follow-up question was even asked. That this wasn't analysis. This was the stage being set for a brutal reality check.
Well, I think he's put himself between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he is very keen to have good relations with Donald Trump. We've seen a lot of effort being put into trade deals and putting the UK into an apparently more favourable position than some of our former EU partners. On the other hand, he clearly doesn't believe that the use of force that the Americans have just demonstrated is the right thing to do. So along with other European leaders, has been calling for restraint and calling for a return to negotiations. Well, I'm afraid the world has moved on rather rapidly. I don't think negotiations in any meaningful form are very likely because the effect of these massive ordnance penetrators has effectively taken the major bargaining chip that Iran had off the table. And I think Iran, if it comes to any form of negotiation, is negotiating for scraps. So the Prime Minister, in a sense, between a rock and a hard place, may have somewhat backed the wrong horse on this one.
Dannatt enters with that calm military tone, but what he delivers is a slow-motion wrecking ball. Starmer, he says, is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Let's translate that. The Prime Minister is paralyzed. He tried to be Trump's, made for trade deals while posing as a peace-loving diplomat. The result, he backed the wrong horse. That's verbatim, a direct hit. Starmer's entire diplomatic gamble just got crushed under American ordnance, while Trump was dropping bombs. Starmer was still clutching outdated fantasies of talks and negotiations. According to Dannatt, those hopes are now useless because Trump's strikes obliterated Iran's biggest bargaining chip. So here we are, a British Prime Minister who misjudged his allies, misread the battlefield, and ended up looking both weak and foolish. Dannatt doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Every measured sentence scorches Starmer alive. What was supposed to be leadership now looks like amateur hour.
What happens now? What will your successor in charge of the military be doing now, Lord Dannatt? What conversations will be taking place with regard to the UK's role in this, if it has any?
Well, of course, that's a matter for the Prime Minister and the British government to decide whether we want to take an active role. My own instinct is that we will decide not to do that. So the military focus for now for the UK is to make sure that our force protection measures for those of our citizens and our service personnel in the wider region are as good as they can be. In particular, we've got the sovereign bases in Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri, now had extra aircraft flown there, and I believe the capability is such that we can fly patrols constantly to make sure that that base does not itself come under attack. And then, of course, not so very far away, but heading towards the Indo-Pacific, is the British-led Carrier Strike Group. That is some kind of target as well, so we need to make sure those force protection measures are good. And then, of course, there is the question of a large number of British citizens in the wider region, not the least of which is a very large number who have got rather marooned in Israel. So the government will have to be thinking about non-combat evacuation operations, which themselves are important, but they're difficult and they consume a lot of resources. So I don't think we'll join in an offensive way, but we've got a lot of work to do to make sure British interests, British people are secure in that region.
These lines are perhaps the most humiliating for Starmer, not because Dannatt attacks him outright, but because of what's left unsaid. When asked what Britain will do now, the answer is painfully clear. Nothing offensive, no bold strategy, just guarding assets and preparing to evacuate citizens. Dannatt makes it obvious. Starmer's UK has no role, no muscle, no plan. The British military is reduced to flying patrols, locking down bases, and getting ready for mass evacuations. That's not a strategy, that's damage control. Britain isn't shaping events, it's just trying to survive the fallout from America's decisions while pretending to be a partner. It's the geopolitical equivalent of showing up to a gunfight with a bucket and a mop. The once proud special relationship has been downgraded to Britain cleaning up after America's chaos. And the worst part, this wasn't inevitable. It's the direct result of Starmer failing to position Britain before the crisis exploded.
Well, we may not intervene if the Prime Minister listens to his bestie, Lord Hermer, who believes that if we do play a role against Iran, it could violate international law. What's your response to that, Lord Dannatt?
Well, of course, this is the great debating point as to whether what the Israelis have done. Now, they would argue that they're acting in self-defense, but the Americans joining in. Now, you can't make a very strong case that the Americans are defending themselves, but so there is this debate as to whether they have got very close to the line between what is legal internationally and whether they've crossed that line. I think they will argue that Iran posed a wider threat, not just in the Middle East, but in a much wider area as well, and therefore there was an element of preemption in the interest of wider security and the interests of other nations, that the United States had joined with Israel, not just to protect Israel, but to protect other countries and other people in that wider region. That's what they will argue. But it's going to be an argument that goes on for quite some time. And lawyers like Lord Hermer will, yes, they'll express their point of view for quite some time to come.
Yeah, it might be more difficult for him to argue that point of view if, for instance, Tehran does retaliate at UK military bases.
Indeed. Then, of course, there's the argument as to who sort of shot first, as it were. But if there was to be an attack on a UK base, well, then that does change the paradigm as far as the UK is concerned. But in answer to your earlier question, I think the UK focus will be on force protection and the protection of our people and our interests, rather than proactively joining in this offensive operation.
The final nail comes when the debate turns to international law. Lord Dannatt calmly outlines the legal grey areas of America's intervention, and in doing so exposes Starmer's greatest weakness. He has no stance of his own. Instead of leading, Starmer hides behind legal technocrats like Lord Hurd, hoping the law will make the decisions he's too afraid to take. But Dannatt drops the reality check. If Iran strikes back, especially at a UK base, everything changes. That means Britain's next move doesn't depend on strategy. It depends on what Iran decides to do. Starmer isn't shaping policy. He's waiting for events to force his hand. That's not leadership. That's cowardice in a suit. It tells every global player, including Iran, that Britain under Starmer is not a threat. It's an observer sitting on the sidelines waiting to be pushed around. Starmer wanted to appear cautious, balanced, and dignified. What he got was exposed, embarrassed, and dismantled by his contradictions, his silence, and his inability to stand firm. Dannatt didn't just criticize him, he held up a mirror. And what the public saw wasn't a statesman, it was a man, pretending to lead, hiding behind vague tweets and diplomatic fluff. This wasn't a debate, it was a demolition. And Starmer never saw the wrecking ball coming.